There's been rumors of Putin being unwell since the mid 2000s, if not earlier. The idea that he has cancer has always been there, that he's fallen off a horse or done something has also been a rumor. And it might be an ice hockey accident as well, or something in the gym. There are lots of possible rumors as to what's been going on. In terms of how the Kremlin hides it, there are the body doubles, if you believe that's the case, and there's some arguments as to whether that is. It is certain, or some have argued it isn't, and we can go and talk in that in more detail there. There is also supposed to be someone who follows him around, who takes samples of his stool. The Kremlin has also made sure, particularly during the coronavirus, that people had to quarantine for 3 weeks before they could actually meet with what is known as the body, which possibly gives you an idea as to where Putin is physically. But anyway, so there has been certainly a lot in terms of what the Kremlin has tried to do. He does have a team of doctors, as you would expect, on hand at any point. And obviously, his bodyguards know first aid very well. So there's plenty of things that the Kremlin have been trying to do over the years in terms of keeping Vladimir Putin alive and fit. The body doubles, I mean, certainly is interesting. It's been written about extensively in terms of the body doubles, as to whether Putin has them or not. Plausibly, he does. I mean, there are pictures of Putin that don't necessarily look like Putin, and he seems to change in various cases by almost the hour. And it is interesting how I think, when was it? A couple of years ago, he was in Kaliningrad, and then 6 hours later, he was in Kamchatka or somewhere in the far east of Russia. It's very difficult to fly from Kaliningrad to Kamchatka in such a short space of time. But there are two reasons that I don't necessarily buy the body double thing. One is simply Putin is a workaholic. It is quite possible that he could and would willingly go from one end of his empire to the other, in order to adhere to meetings. And two, it's quite dangerous because if you allow, there's nothing to stop the body double from signing that you've decided to step down as president. So, and then it's very hard to get back as president, especially if if the FSB has made that decision that you're no longer the man for the job. So, for a personist autocrat, I think the idea of having body doubles who can, and this seems to be the root, this seems to be what we see, that they can instigate policy, they can make decisions. Having those body doubles that can make decisions is particularly dangerous for a personist autocrat because there's nothing to stop someone from convincing one of the body doubles to sign your own ouster. So that I think is probably the biggest reason as to why I don't necessarily believe in the body doubles. We will have to wait and see for if and when Putin does die, and the archives are open as to whether these body doubles ever existed. But I think it's certainly fascinating in terms of the amount of ink that has been spilled on this possibility. Well, constitutionally, what would happen is that Mikhail Mishustin, the prime minister, would become president. However, Mikhail Mishustin is, to put it bluntly, quite beige. And I don't think he has a particular following in the Kremlin. There's a reason why Putin chose him because he's a good technocrat, he's good at getting things done, but he doesn't have a power base himself, and therefore he's quite useful because constitutionally, as I said, the prime minister is the person who would become the president. So if he had a power base, he might get ideas about his station and actually challenge Putin. The fact he doesn't makes him perfect to be a prime minister because he's never going to try and remove Putin. So that would be a major problem. I think we'd be looking at examples like Uzbekistan when the leader Islam Karimov died in 2016. He'd been in power since 1987, if my memory serves me correctly. It was like cats fighting in a bag for a few weeks in terms of who was actually going to be in position. It could have been his daughter, it could have been the head of the security services, it could have been the head of the Security Council. As it turned out, it was following the constitution, the prime minister, but no one quite knew about that for a while. So I think that would certainly be the case in regards to Putin. The Siloviki, the so-called power ministries of the Interior Ministry, the FSB, would certainly not take particularly well to Mishustin becoming president unless they could control him. So they would prefer probably to have one of their own in power, and therefore it would be trying to remove him from power, and jockeying for position over that. I think there's a common idea that this is Putin's war. Now we can discuss whether it's Putin's war, whether it's Russia's war in more detail, but the idea is that if Putin was to die, the commander-in-chief effectively dies as well, and therefore the Russian army is going to stop and attacking Ukraine. I don't necessarily buy this. I think that if Putin dies, most likely what changes in the Kremlin is simply a name, that the Siloviki groups in the Siloviki will find a way to take power. They will replace Putin with one of their own. And the war may not continue, but certainly the Putinist system or something similar to the Putin system will continue. The problem is, as well, Putin has put any future Russian leader in a very difficult position. It's similar perhaps to a British politician standing up in Parliament and saying, yes, we should give the Falkland Islands back to the Argentinians. I mean, that politician would be lynched as soon as they left Westminster. So any politician in Russia who says we should give Crimea back to the Ukrainians, or we should give Donbass back to the Ukrainians, or the 5 illegally taken parts of Ukraine, they're now part of the Russia according to the constitution, we should give them back. They're never going to stay in power for very long. So it's certain it might stop the war, Putin's dying, but it won't stop Russia as it is today, in my opinion. To an extent, it's stating the obvious. Putin is going to die soon. He's over the average age for a Russian man, which is 66. Yes, of course, he has the team of medical doctors and possibly body doubles as well, and lots of support in terms of medical support. He could be having blood transfusions fairly regularly. He seems to have had lots of plastic surgery over the years, these sorts of things. But he is 6 years older than the average Russian man. He keeps himself fit, and so it is to a great extent stating the obvious. He will die at some point. I think that Zelensky is trying to highlight the weakness of Putin, and this goes back to videos that we've seen of Putin's hand shaking, his feet shaking, and various other times when he's been holding the desk and looking as though he's grimacing in pain. He's not very good. Putin is very good, I should say, at holding his and making him mask of his expressions. But there is that, I think it was a meeting with Prime Minister Mishustin where he's holding the desk and grimacing. Now, it could be that Mishustin is telling him something very boring of a pension reform, but it could also be that he's actually experiencing quite a lot of pain. So there certainly remains the possibility that Putin is feeling age. He's obviously probably feeling that this war has lasted a lot longer than the 2 weeks he claimed he could take Kiev in. So it certainly has been a problem for him. And I think that it does, perhaps Zelensky is trying to highlight to Donald Trump, who likes strong men, that Putin really isn't a strong man. That he's actually quite weak and can be, that the idea that Trump can negotiate with Putin, that Trump should give concessions to Russia, isn't the right approach. That here is someone who is weak, and so the Americans should basically take the clothes off him if necessary. And I think that's what Zelensky is trying to do in regards to this. Zelensky's relationship with Trump is nowhere near as good as Trump's bromance, which isn't reciprocated as far as I can see with Putin. So it is certainly difficult, but Zelensky has spent the last 3 years doing difficult things. If he can highlight to Trump that Putin is weak, then this may well change the way that the Trump administration perceives the situation. And they may start to support, if not Zelensky, then at least Ukraine. They're still quite clear that there will be presidential elections in Ukraine at some point. And I suspect they've probably said something along the lines of it would be great if Zelensky were to be a one-term president. Um, we'll have to see about that. But it may highlight to Trump that he's bet on the wrong horse, and here is his opportunity to get off, to put his bet on the right horse, Ukraine. As Zelensky said, I'll be here a lot longer than Putin. Most likely, if all to all intents and purposes, he will be. Obviously, he could be hit by a bus or a missile tomorrow, and I hope that doesn't happen. But nevertheless, he is much younger than Putin, so logically, he will be here longer. So I think that's what he's trying to do by highlighting that Putin is old, that Putin is weak, and that this is a way to try and get the Trump administration to reconsider where it's going. In the same way that I think that we can expect the Europeans are trying to convince the Americans that Putin isn't for negotiations. And we can expect perhaps Putin to show or try to show that he's actually strong. And one way may be, and this could be that Zelensky is trying to goad him into showing strength. And the way to show strength is to send missiles against Ukraine and therefore highlight once and for all that Putin does not want negotiations. So that could also be a way in terms of changing the Trump administration's thinking on this. He will need to show that he's strong. It's very much a part of his persona. So yes, of course, they've been sending Shaheeds, I think 170, and since they said that they would start negotiations, or they thought negotiations were a good idea. But we can expect that Zelensky, I think this was Zelensky's attempt to goad Putin to doing something particularly extravagant to highlight that he's not a weak man. That could be another part of the thinking from the Ukrainian government.